Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first podcast, first episode of Working Like a Mexican. Round of applause. Woo! I'm your host, Speaker on the Speakers. The podcast. Why is it called Working Like a Mexican? Working like a Mexican is a term that's been coined by others, not by me personally, but it's been used around. And all it really states is that Mexican people work their butts off and really have no excuses. They just work and work hard. Um, why I named the podcast this title is because I want to interview people who have done just that, right? Who have worked their butts off, have made no excuses, and have reached success. Not just Mexican people, just people in general, but that have that same mentality. Um, these are people who have overcome adversity, obstacles, and who have just hustled, who have the drive, determination, ambition, persistence, the work ethic, and just no BS type of people. So that's really what this podcast is about. I really want to celebrate those people, and I want the world to know them because I really want everyone to know that they've all come to America to reach that American dream. Um, with that said, before we actually start interviewing any guest, I want to talk a little bit about American history. Why do I want to talk about American history? It's really for two reasons. One, we all live in America, so we should know it. But two, also because as we start doing a deep dive into the history, we're going to learn about different groups of people that have migrated here over the years, whether it was 5 years ago or 200 years ago. Why they migrated, where they ended up, and what they're doing now. I think that will also play a part when we start interviewing guests and ask them about their family history. I think that's all going to tie together. With that said, I have a special guest today. He's a good friend of mine. He's a former high school teacher, former high school principal, and former high school coach, Mr. RK. Round of applause for RK, guys. How you doing today, sir?
Well, hello, Rico. We meet again.
We meet again. How's everything?
Life could not be better, and I'm sure everything is well with you. Keep
Yes, thank you,
hustling.
thank you.
Okay.
So I've known RK for a few years now. Great person. He is really an expert in history, American history. He's taught it for several years, and he is a person that I reached out to because he knows it best. He knows it better than anyone I know. Um, so RK, a few questions for you.
Okay.
We all have last names, right?
Right.
And they all originate somewhere.
Right.
Um, Many of us don't know where they originate from, but what's in the name?
Well, the answer to your question is simple. Everybody has a last name, they have a family, and therefore the one word answer is history. There's a family history that we all have. Now, for most of us, that family history is 3 generations. In other words, you probably have some memory of your grandmother and stories she shared with you, and certainly your mother and father. And a few of us, we may be fortunate enough to have met our great grandparents, and may have some story from them or something that's filtered down. But generally speaking, your history frame is 3 generations, just 100 years. Now, of course, that is important to you because largely the 100 years, that the 3 generations may occupy, in terms of you and your last name, you're in a time now and you're in a place. And reduce that down to a word, those are now your circumstances, whoever you are. And we can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose what we do given those circumstances. And I think that's where, as you mentioned, stories, these are people stories and people who hustled in whatever situation they were in. and somehow emerged successful.
Why is history important?
Well, I think that history is important. I think a lot of people tend to want to reduce that to boring dates. And I hate to say this, I was blessed with great history teachers where it wasn't just memorize this date. I'd say there were two things. Everything is part of a human story, okay, from prehistoric times till now. So, first of all, people's stories are fascinating. But the real reason you have to use history as a tool. So, I define history the following way: history is a knowledge of the past to better understand your present and more intelligently plan for your future. So the importance of history is learning your history, but also using it to help you in the future. And so the last little tagline that I'd pass along with that is when you have a knowledge of, first of all, your family history going back and then maybe much more in depth, what you can begin to do is say, okay, what am I going through today that is something that approximates, doesn't duplicate, but we do approximate history. It's kind of like that line in Pirates of the Caribbean where the girl's going, pirate rules, pirate rules. And he says, well, they're kind of more like guidelines. Okay. So it isn't anything that you say is an absolute, but there are certainly things you can learn from and look at the modern circumstances and apply what either worked or avoid what didn't work in the past. You know, the main
Yeah.
thing you want to do is draw on the experience of your previous generations and not repeat mistakes.
Yes, absolutely. So with that said, like I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be sharing stories of individuals who have reached success in America, and have really reached the American dream, or at least a piece of it, right? Um, let's take it back. America, right? We've all taken a history class or two or three, but don't really remember much about it, or it was told to us in a way where we weren't interested, or whatever the case may be. Let's talk about the history of America. Who were the early American settlers, and what were they looking for, and what did they find?
Oh boy, great question. And you've opened up a very, very large topic. So let me first of all just push back um, a little bit. This isn't a pushback in the way you guys are using it, but push back in time. With all deference to the prehistoric and Indian cultures that dominated America, okay, I'm going to focus, and I think we ought to limit what we're going to talk about to more or less the um, founding European situation, because here again is an example of history. You and I are both conversant moderately, for me, in two languages, English and Spanish.
Yes.
And I remember a conversation you had with me where you said, isn't it interesting? If you think about it, both of us speak, in quote, European languages.
So,
So,
so true.
as much as all of these civilizations and what they're discovering in South America now in archaeology, uh, we have not had a profound impact on us, you know what I mean, from uh, a language standpoint or a lot of societal issues left by those earlier civilizations. But we certainly are influenced daily by the European languages that we speak. So, one thing I will say though is we've kind of quietly, this I find very interesting. One of the things I've learned about more recently is agriculture. And of course, when the European colonizers, settlers, conquerors came, one of the things they learned from the natives were everything about agriculture. So out here, I've just more recently learned I'm becoming a farmer. about the Three Sisters. Do you know about the Three Sisters?
I do not know.
Okay, well, I think your audience will enjoy it because everybody now can become a backyard farmer. One of the things we learned about Native American agriculture was you take about an 18-inch circle, okay, and build it into a small mound. And in the middle, you plant a corn seed, which will be the corn stalk that'll grow up. And then you plant bean seeds. And as the corn stalk grows, the bean vine will grow up along with the stalk. And by the way, they're totally compatible. And then you put about 6 squash seeds around the outside and tend to it. And pretty soon you've got these 18-inch plots with squash and corn and beans. And that already is a foundation of at least a respectable diet so that you don't starve.
Right.
So basically, the early settlers adopted a lot of the agricultural techniques that the native cultures had learned through decades and hundreds of years of hard work and
Who,
experimentation.
who were the settlers? Where did they come from?
Well, that's real easy, and I'll get you onto that real quick. Basically, for North America, I'll focus on, but South America was the Spanish and the Portuguese,
Okay.
but then you also had all the other cultures in competing for trade rights for the Caribbean islands, which because of sugar was massively important. And then in North America, really 3 major influences. You had the Spanish, and you had the French, and you had the English.
Okay.
So everything today is somewhat of an amalgamation of that foundation, which of course was followed now. You have epic waves of income and population growth, certainly in both North and South America. So there were waves of immigration that followed that.
When these different nations were showing up, was this were they showing up at the same time? Were they at different time periods?
Well, yes and no. There are some big gaps, and an analogy I'll make right now is, for instance, we landed on the moon in 1969, and you look at where we are now, and we haven't been back really since the Apollo expeditions with
Right.
man Earth conquest. Well, it's a similar story in terms of the people's arrivals here. So to begin with, I'm going to give you a date just so we can begin to fix it.
Okay.
But I'm going to put 1453 and 1492 slash, okay? And you go, most people have heard of 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Mhm.
But it really is, you can't get over 1453. And in 1453, the final remnant of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, which had been a shield against the expansion of the Arab and Muslim influence into Europe, fell to the Turks. Okay. Well, what happened then is Constantinople was the center of trade for the Europeans, getting all of their goods from India, China, and the East. And they
When you
had,
say when you say goods, can you elaborate? Like, what are we
oh,
talking
oh yeah, well, spices was always big. Silk was another thing. You've heard of the Silk Route, that
Yes. Yes.
and five. So there was a lot of trade for what I would call items that the Europeans themselves could not make or manufacture or had available, but were highly desirable, and
Got
they
it.
were luxury items. So trading ship, for instance, later on, I heard one lecture once where the guy said, well, it's cost so much to put these ships out. Why would you do it? And he said, the profit from one shipload of trade goods was so great that even if they lost a bunch of other ships, they made enough money that it was worth the risk. So,
Now let's talk about money for a second. Um, were they on a bargaining system or were they trading in gold? Like, what was it?
oh, well, that's now here's a whole nother history we're opening up. Um, of course, precious metals, gold and silver, you know what I mean, were always mediums of exchange. Okay. But actually, at this time, because of course, back in those days, travel was dangerous. You didn't want to walk around with gold in your pocket and get robbed by the first guy down the road, okay, who knew you had it. Uh, so there actually was a banking system, okay, in place. And then certainly from the 1500s on, from the early 1500s on, they were organized so that one banker could write a note if you were in Holland, for instance, okay, and you could take that note and present it to somebody in another area, and your credit was good. That piece of paper worked,
Okay.
okay. And of course, you're beginning to see. Well, there always was the minting of coins. That goes back to ancient times. But the various governments would mint their coins mostly in actual gold or silver. And I mean, famously, everybody probably has heard of a Spanish piece of 8. Okay. And that is a wonderful example. And I remember learning as a young kid, instead of a quarter, people would say 2 bits. Okay. And it goes back to they would divide a coin into 8, okay, pieces, and they could break it up to better barter and trade. And so a quarter in my younger days was considered 2 bits, okay? And it was equivalent to 2 bits of a Spanish piece of 8, was what the thinking was when they came up with the term.
Got it.
So they were using actual gold and silver, but they did have a banking system and they did have insurance companies. They had stock companies developing.
So there was
So,
already a system in place, more
right.
organized system in place
And
for
that creates
currency.
one of the novelties of history. One theme might be you could do a whole study coming from the angle that conflict grew upon roots of trade, because that's where the wealth was and the government. So they were trading for goods, and the other part that I think is important to look back at Constantinople, they used to have the Italians, which is why they were so powerful for many, many years. They were in control of Constantinople virtually in many ways. So they were the middlemen, but in quote, they were Christian, they were European, they shared a lot. When
Yeah.
the Muslims took over, now that route of trade dramatically shifted and changed, which is what gave impetus to Portugal probably leading the way, who wanted to sail around Africa to reach the Indies and China. And they began that program shortly after that. And that also led directly to Columbus in 1492, where they were seeking a trading route. And I think that's where most people, remembering their history, is where you mentioned the Vikings and these other, you know what I mean?
Right.
Chinese circumnavigated the world probably in 1421 or so. So you have these early explorations, but the one that had impact and opened up North and South America was really Columbus discovering it, so to speak.
Now, let me ask you something about Columbus, because I think I heard this somewhere. Where was Columbus from?
Well, there are some different views on this,
Okay,
okay? And I don't want to pick a side because I haven't come away.
sure.
He was nominally a Italian,
That's
okay?
what I understood.
Now the point is, he actually though spent time in England, all
Uh-huh.
right, and it was there, no doubt, that we think he encountered English fishermen who were actually at that time fishing off the Grand Banks in Newfoundland area, but they did not want to reveal that to the rest of the world because, of course, it's a source of wealth that
Yeah.
but he was aware of it. So I think that Columbus became very aware through the English sailors there that there was land, you know what I mean, to the west of them. Then there's another thing. There's a lot of conjecture now that he actually saw a map that may have been derived from a Chinese map that
Okay.
was a world map. And even today, you can pretty well see it. I'll get you an image of it sometime. And he may have had knowledge of that. So he knew there was land out to the west. So the story for Columbus begins. He's passionate about this, that, hey, I can get to the west. I mean, go sail west and get to the east shorter and faster than going all the way around Africa and back. So he goes to the Portuguese first, which is a great story. And they're the first and the fastest and the baddest getting into this going around Africa. So you'd think they'd take him up on the offer. Because also, here's the interesting fact, the Portuguese agreed with him completely that the world was round.
Mhm.
They agreed with him completely that you could get to the east by sailing west. Okay? So the question is, why would they turn him down? Well, they had a reason. They're mathematicians, and this goes back to even Greek times, and they knew the circumference of the Earth pretty well close as today's calculations. Okay. And they basically said, well, Columbus, this is wonderful. It's a great idea, but it won't work. And their reason for saying that it would not work was they said there's 12,000 miles to sail between our coast and the east, as they referred to it. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you look at the globe and you measure the miles, they were right. It's about 12,000 miles. And so they said the reason this won't work, Columbus, is our ships, the way they're built and everything else, and the way we can supply them and fit them out, can only get you about 3,000 miles.
Now, these ships were powered how?
Well, they were sail powered, okay,
Okay.
and of course, you still in quote have galleys around with men rowing them, but then you've got the problem: you have to feed them and keep them alive in
Right.
water. So you're the ships that they were using for trade.
And I'm assuming food supply as well, right?
Oh yeah, I mean you had to be. The great thing about boating and ships and everything else is you have to be fully self-sufficient back in those days. If something broke, you needed lumber and a carpenter to
Right.
repair. If you lost a sail, you needed cloth and somebody to sew and repair the sails.
Right.
So they were self-contained, self-sufficient, and that there wasn't any help. You didn't dial 911
Right.
and have somebody tow your car. So it was a different world. So yeah, they were limited to 3,000 miles, and they said you're going to perish out in the middle of nowhere, and we'll lose everything. So he then approached Ferdinand and Isabella. Okay,
Who are they?
but they're the king and queen of Spain.
Got it.
And 1492 is a huge year in Spanish history. Okay, we tend to think of it as when Columbus sailed the ocean blue and he arrived here. But
Right.
actually, in Spanish history, the most important event of that year was that Ferdinand and Isabella, and they were the the son and daughter of the kings of the two largest areas, Christian areas in Spain. And so when they were married, they united that. And then they made it their business, and Ferdinand in particular, to reconquer the rest of Spain from the Muslims who had invaded. And so what took place, people have to remember, and this is one of the things that why Spain was so tough back then. They had originally in the 700s, the Muslims had invaded, crossed over from North Africa, and had really conquered nearly all of Spain, and had actually gone up into France, and were only stopped at the Battle of Tours by Charles Martel in 732. But if you take the 700s as the date they arrived, the the Spanish Christians were at war perpetually for 700 odd years. Okay, so at that time they would have had the toughest guys fighting, because They had known nothing but centuries of conflict.
Right.
But what they were able to do, 1492, they took back their territory, conquered the Granada, the last Muslim stronghold. And so that was called the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the big event. And then a second event, they expelled all the Jews. Okay. Now, that had an adverse effect, but then in their mind, a positive effect. The Jewish community was their merchant class largely, that traded, and you'll see this in all of your in history, they were money lenders and bankers and things. And generally, they were not well liked by the populations that they were living in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but in the mind of Ferdinand and Isabella, they were, and particularly Isabella, strongly Catholic. And their idea of how to create a strong nation was, we want everybody to be Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
We want to control the country. We're not sharing power with the Muslim religion,
Right.
we need to expel and get rid of everybody, get them out of here who is not Catholic. Okay. So that seems kind of harsh, but in their minds, what they were trying to do was unify a country that basically had been at war for 700 years. So they saw that as a positive step. And then the third thing that happened was Columbus approaching them. Now, again, interestingly enough, Ferdinand wasn't all that interested as the king. He thought, this isn't a good bet on money. We got other priorities. But
Sure.
The Queen, Isabella, based upon largely her religious beliefs of wanting to extend Christianity and the knowledge of Christ to other parts of the world, she backed him, and that's where you get the story of her, jewelry and these three ragtag ships they bound for him.
So really, why she backed Columbus was strictly for religion purposes.
I don't want to say strictly, but I want to say certainly I believe from everything I've read and known, profoundly, yes, that was her major motivation. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that she, you, me, anybody would be very excited about the prospects of opening up trade routes and dealing with people and everything else. And in the end, I'm sure that's why Ferdinand went along with it, because, okay, the prospects might be that this guy could be right, right? It was a risk
Right.
reward.
It's a gamble.
Yeah. So just like anybody else, there's a risk benefit that you calculate. And I think, but he was definitely more that, and he was going to limit the risk, you know. And I think that you'll see that Isabella um, was a deeply religious person and profoundly uh, caring about the Catholic religion, and the expansion of it. So, yeah, I think that was a major reason. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Columbus gets the okay. What happens next?
Oh, then it gets exciting, right? So Columbus takes off, and of course, you could have the whole story about his voyage. Okay.
Okay.
Um, I do think that it took a certain amount of guts, to do what he did. You are,
To be clear, this hadn't been done by anyone before, correct?
well,
As far as they knew.
yeah, as far as they knew, no one had done this. And I
Uh-huh.
think the answer is okay, he gets there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's land. He sailed there and
Where does he land?
yeah, he hits land and they go, okay, that's it. Doggone it. He was right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what's interesting is Columbus thought he had found the East, his first arrival.
Right.
And when he went back to Spain and everybody, they all thought, wow, he found it. We found the East, right?
So to be clear, did he just get there and turn back, or what? Do we know
No, he spent some time among the islands. Okay.
what islands are we referring to?
Well, Santo Domingo. Okay,
Is that like the Caribbean or?
yeah, Caribbean. Excuse
Okay.
me. Yeah, Caribbean. So he hit those islands, and the um, the reason that I say that's interesting because again they were populated by basically the there were different tribes. So I'll say the tribal Indians. Okay, and some of them were more aggressive, and some of them were a little more pleasant to meet. I'll put it that way.
Right.
But also remember too, he lost a ship in doing this, so he had a strong desire to go back to more or less get reinforcements. And so he left a group there, but then sailed back with the news.
Okay.
And he made it back. And fascinating little twist of history. They so desperately just wanted to get back. They actually landed in Portugal, which was kind of an iffy thing because the Portuguese and Spanish were competitors, and
Right.
so the Portuguese king, and so it was a question of, gee, do we let the word out, or do we keep this to ourselves on the Portuguese side?
Right.
And credit to the Portuguese king at that time. He goes, and it was an interesting thing. He said, no, you can't keep this kind of thing contained. You know what I mean? The genie's out of the bottle. He did come to us first. In fact, the movie portrayed this pretty much the way I think it is. He did come to us first, and he's a great man. Send him on to Ferdinand and Isabella with our compliments. Let's just celebrate, okay? Which then again opened up all of the exploration that followed. And then, and you'll remember he had multiple voyages, and mostly with the thoughts, I found the East. I just got to find where the money is, okay? And then he figured out he didn't find where the money was, and pretty soon he's in jail. But Europe now shortly has discovered this isn't the Indies and China that we were thinking of. There's a whole new world, and we've all heard that term. That's over here. And then you get the map maker, Amerigo Vespucci, okay, mapping it, and he goes back, and some guy takes his name, and we put it on, and from Amerigo Vespucci, we get America.
Oh
So
wow! I didn't know that.
you didn't know that?
I did not know that. No.
That's it. Well, the map maker got the credit. It's not called Columbia. So
Yeah.
there's a few songs, but that's how it got its name. And they realized it's a whole new place.
This is great information. I think this is a good stopping point for us.
Okay.
I'd like to pick this up on our next episode with what happens next. So until then, guys, thank you for joining. Please like, share, and subscribe our channel, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right.